What do you do if you're a traditional Catholic and cannot get to a traditional Latin Tridentine Rite Mass? Now, I'm coming at this as not as a priest who's fortunate to celebrate Mass, be able to celebrate Mass at will, who's telling people, here's how you fill your legalistic obligations. I am coming at this as someone who is answering the question of how do I survive? How do I get the graces I need to save my soul? Once a week, under normal circumstances, once a week would not suffice, and I don't get squat. That is how I'm approaching this question, and here's some of my answers. So, not all these solutions are going to work for everyone, but hopefully at least of the hopefully at least some of them will. So number one, call for rides. And who should you call? So, but there's no SSPX church near me. It's like call the nearest one. Call the SSPX district headquarters for your continent, or if you're just outside the continent, the nearest one. You would be you'd be amazed at just how close knit traditional Catholics are over vast tracts of land. So for example, I lived in I live in rural Nova Scotia. I couldn't drive. I needed a ride, so I emailed the Civic Contest Chapel, who was like 3 hours away from me. I couldn't drive. They knew someone who was coming my way to a traditional Latin mass. They were able to put me in touch, and not it wasn't even their mass that I was going to. It was another one I wanted to go to. They just through the grapevine knew each other, and everyone was going to each other's masses, so that they were able to put me in touch. Furthermore, you can reach out to let the district superior here and the district headquarters of Society of St. Pius X, which cover entire countries, which cover entire continents. And you can possibly get something set up. It might be difficult, it might be hard, especially if you're dirt poor. And email them, explain the situation to them. If you're watching this video, you probably have the resources to at least reach out. Email them. So that leads to my second possibility. Try to get something set up where you are. That is quite that it takes a lot of work, but honestly, compared to getting the Novus Ordo to bless something, it's actually quite easy with the SSPX. I remember I was told what you need. I remember I did this once in my area. I said, "What do we need to set up a mission?" Stable group of 10. It was comparatively easy, easy-ish for me. Do they need to be Catholic? No. I got a stable group. I was able to get something to at least start expanding. Now, that is something you should do if you have an evangelistic mindset. Otherwise, it will not be sustainable. So you have to, if you feel like your calling life is stay where you are, work for the heiress conversion, put yourself out there and invite people to mass, get people to come to true faith. That is definitely an option you should look at. Another option is moving. Now, I personally do not recommend moving. And there are people who I consider to be, quote, and this is mission attitude, this is mission territory attitude, and I'm not the only one who thinks this something mission territory to anyone who may be in an SSPX priority. Do not take offense when I say this. Spoiled brats. This includes people who move just to be close to the sacraments. Again, no disrespect intended, but there are people who go there and they do not think that they need to evangelize. They do not think they need to care about invite people to mass. I just need to get the sacraments, and who cares about the people who I'm leaving behind, etc., etc. I don't care. I know people who've had interactions with such people, and in the mission territory, and people in the mission territory say, and this is not me. I do not take things this far, but I know people who say, "I am grateful I don't have access to the Church of Latin Mass, if that's how it's going to be, if that's the attitude, if that's what I'm going to do with the sacraments. I would not want to eat and drink judgment upon myself in that way. I would not go that far. The sacraments are always a blessing, but they are a blessing that should be used rightly. And there are people who should move, who can move. Not everyone can, not everyone wants to, not everyone should, but some people can and should. Definitely shouldn't be the default situation for people who are isolated. I think that, and to treat it like it should be the default situation is it's lacking in charity. It is a spoiled attitude. It neglects the salvation of entire regions, entire countries who do not have access to even the faith now because people are who have the faith are leaving. But it is the right choice for some people. So I'll give an example. If you have a family, you've tried evangelizing, tried to get things working, but nothing's working. And the people in your area are constantly swearing. They're constantly setting bad examples for your children. There are maybe illegal substances being sold. They're teaching immoral things in the schools, etc. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. And you see you're having a negative effect on you and your children. You call to get an SSPX priest come in. They just can't. They say, "I'm sorry, we just don't have the resources." You got a good job opportunity out somewhere, and there's an SSPX church nearby, right close by, and you are largely going without. That's the situation. Then you should consider going. And when you go, you should take that time. I strongly say encourage your children to pray as you have access to sacraments for all the people who are isolated and don't, for all the people who don't have the true faith. Because one thing that's even worse than loss of access to the sacraments, loss of access to the traditional Mass, is to not even have the true faith. Salvation is possible without access to the sacraments. Very difficult, but possible. It's not possible without the true faith. In fact, one of the reasons I believe that God allows so many people to be in this situation is so that they can be a light. They can evangelize. But again, it's going to be some people should be moving, some people should be staying put to try to work things out and evangelize their own area. But everyone should be doing something, and everyone should everyone should realize that sacraments are meant to be weapons and tools to fight for your salvation, the salvation of those around you. I recently heard a sermon on my SSPX chapel this past Sunday telling people they should care about the salvation of those around them. I spoke with SSPX priests, asked them, should I evangelize? Are you confirmed? They said, yes. Then you're supposed to do it. If you are in a place that is not literally the upper room of Jerusalem, you go to Mass there, you have it because once upon a time, there were some lay Catholics who went out there who had the sacraments. There were some priests who went there away from the sacraments to make sure there'd be sacraments in the middle of nowhere. They built something. Whether you have easy access to sacraments or not, whether you're going to stay put or whether you're going to move, that should be you. Now, then there's a third group, people who are not called to move, cannot move. Like there are people who have to look after their old family members, or just cannot afford to move, and the priest can't come in. What do you do? And in fact, I'm especially hoping that this video is meant for you more than anyone else. I'm going to operate on the presumption that you may not even have easy access to the Novus Ordo. There are a lot of spoiled Catholics out there, trad and otherwise, who cannot conceive of the idea of not having easy access to the sacraments and cannot understand why someone wouldn't just move. Not everyone can afford it. Other people have obligations that tie them there, like they have family, elderly parents. They need to look after them. And it's easy to just say, oh, just put the sacraments first. Well, are you looking after their mother or paying their bills so they can move? It's unfortunate. If you're a Catholic in this situation, there are still some options, maybe not for the sacraments, but to keep your faith alive. And this is one of the things I always say. The traditional Catholic faith is a faith. And you are in good company. Remember, the Israelites in the desert did not have sacrifices in all those years in the desert, except for the sacrifices that dedicated the tabernacle. And wanting to rush ahead and do anything that they wanted to get the sacraments was what led to the golden calf, from what we can tell. While there are still things you can do. There is, happily, SSPX does do online masses that you can watch. If you're fortunate enough to get a Bible, or traditional Catholic Bible, or a traditional Catholic Latin Mass Missal that you can order online, if you can do that, and if you can't order it online, look at used bookstores in your area. So, actually, just 1 second. I've actually had a number of these traditional Latin Mass Missals. I think this one was gifted to me. I have a few others that I bought at second used bookstores. Open it up. You should see readings. You should see Latin on one side, English on the other. You should look to the cover. Look for something like this, and look for a date somewhere in it that says when it was printed. One of the sure ways to tell if it's traditional Latin Mass Missal, at least of any sort. Open the front page, look for the Mass of the Catechumens, name of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Amen, in toto boditari Dei, a Dei Command. If you see the Eudicare, that is probably traditional Latin Mass Missal. It is a huge consolation. If you can order and get something blessed by priests or relics, if you can order a brown scapular from the Fatima Center, tell them, can you get a priest to bless it? That is something. You can get rosaries that way as well. I think SSPX gives free. I think the not SSPX, the Fatima Center gives free rosaries. Look for that as well. So look into that as well. Also, look for, especially if there are any Catholic cemeteries near you. When I say Catholic cemeteries, I'm talking about Catholic cemeteries because in the middle of nowhere. But even some places, there is not even Novus Ordo. There might be an old burial ground from when the area might have been Catholic. Even in places like Saudi Arabia, there are old Christian cemeteries because back when the area used to be Christian. You can pray for the souls who were buried there, explicitly by name. That is the grace you can give and a work you can do that no one else will be doing. No one else will. Pray for the repose of the souls who are buried there, who are otherwise forgotten. You're not cursed. You are there as a blessing to the souls who would otherwise be forgotten. That might be the situation why you're in your situation. Also, when it comes to the sacraments, I do want to point out, and yes, I'm aware that receiving the sacraments is very different from just making spiritual communions. I've done both. I made spiritual confession. I made actual confession. The actual confession does make a bigger difference in getting out of sin, staying out of sin. There are steps you can take to prepare for when you can get ready to confess. Examine your conscience. Make a list of all your bad habits and make sure you try to break them one by one, little by little. My honest suggestion, and I believe St. Alphonsus Liguori gave this advice, is start with the biggest sin and break it first. Do good works, do works of charity, even evangelizing, praying for the dead especially, and pray for these things to be broken. God can and will give you these graces if you ask for them enough, especially talking with people who may be struggling with mortal sin in the middle of nowhere without access to the sacraments. Another thing that may or may not be an option is Eastern rites. Like, for example, in some countries, you may not have an SSPX or traditional Latin Mass presence, but some Eastern rites might be available. Now, Eastern rites are mixed bag in themselves. So some groups play masses like the Maronites, are heavily Novus Ordoized. Sometimes they even allow communion on the hand. They do masses versus populum. They're not as crazy as the Novus Ordo. Novus Ordo is truly quackers in some things I've seen. But use caution for each one. They will do things like women giving readings and even some of the Byzantine rites. But aside from that, they're largely good. But you need to pay close attention about what's going on. Make sure due reverence is done, proper liturgical vessels are being used, etc. And also that the true faith is being taught. Even if it's a valid mass, you are forbidden from attending the mass of someone you know to be a heretic. Also, now for the Novus Ordo. There are a lot of traditional Catholics who have questions about the Novus Ordo and its validity. Period. Full stop. I'm going to operate here on the presumption that the Novus Ordo is valid. I'm not going to address that question here now. If it's not, you definitely should not attend for obvious reasons. That being said, if you do have a Novus Ordo, there are certain things you can. If it is valid, and I don't recommend it at all. I positively do not recommend it. Period. Full stop. That's it. If you do go with the Novus Ordo, there are certain things you should do. A, communion on the tongue. Some might forbid it. Don't do communion on the hand. Save under the gravest circumstances. Try to approach emphasis on if all the sacraments. I'll be honest with you that I miss out on. It's actually not the traditional Latin Mass. It is the sacrament of confession. It is when you're isolated. It's not even the Mass that you miss the most. It is the sacrament of confession. Emphasize on going to confession. Communion, minimize it. I know traditional Catholics who attend the Novus Ordo, and they have instituted communion on the hand from lay ministers on the grounds that they've gone up to the priest, and the priest is so irreverent with the Blessed Sacrament that decided to go receive from the lady because it's the lesser evil. It is not a situation I do not recommend, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'll say why. Because I know traditional families who they take their kids to new mass, even with Fraternity of St. Peter masses, etc. And they start getting their kids used to modernist theology. We need to accept this just to get the sacraments. We need to accept blessings of illicit couples, etc. And to the point they stop believing as they ought and start believing as they are. They start defending these things as being acceptable or tolerable or even good, or maybe it's not that bad, because the price of accepting that the Novus Ordo is bad and false, what's going on in this parish is false, would mean they have to go without the sacraments. And they end up denying the faith. And if you just want the sacraments, I got an option for you. Convert to the Coptic Orthodox Church. Apostatize from Catholicism and go Eastern Orthodox. Then you'll have easy access to sacraments, reverently too. Well, I can't do that. I'd lose my faith. Kind of my point. That's my point. You cannot be saved without the true faith. And even if you say in your head you don't believe these things, eventually your behavior will tacitly it will make you become the thing that you despise. Which is why I do not encourage people to go to Novus Ordo. Well, I don't believe in the ecumenism going on. But I still, accept to take part in it. Okay, then you're going to habituate yourself to believing that is false. That is okay. And it's not, and it's not. And you will then turn around and criticize another archbishop for doing a pagan ritual publicly and scandalizing people when you're doing it or tolerating it or accepting it yourself in church. Or even worse, maybe you won't call it out. Which I say is worse because it means you lost the faith, in which case you can receive as many sacrifices as you want. It's not going to do any good. Doesn't matter how much peace of mind you have, you're soothing your soul right into hell. Even St. John Mariani spoke of that, about receiving the sacraments worthily. He would often deny people absolution in confession, and people go without communion in his parishes. parish they ran because they were not fully converted. They had not fully saved, not fully changed their hearts. They were not, and he says, I think he said in one of his sermons, say John Riviani, patron saint of priests, when is the right time for communion? Is that at Easter time? No. Is that at Christmas time? No. Is the point of death? No. When is the right time for communion? When you've given up your sins for good and all. So that's my advice is put an emphasis on that. So, but in practical terms, try to get a daily missal. I think there are some of these online you can pray with as well, or watch an online mass, or do a day of devotion, or make your own devotional service of Catholic, or your own devotional home liturgy of Catholic devotions with a rosary, litany of Our Lady, act of spiritual communion. It's not the same thing. I'm not even going to pretend that it is, and I'd be lying to you if I said it was, and you wouldn't believe me, even if I did. But it's something. It's something you can work on. It's something that can put you in the right direction. What and it's all it gives you something. But your main focus in your situation should be quality of the sacraments. Are you lying? Make sure you give it up. Are you committing grave explication? Give it up. Find ways to mortify the senses. You can still do that. You can still fast. And if you quit sin and you have perfect contrition for your sins, the effects, you can have confession by desire. It is possible. It is not a great way to be in, but there are other people in that situation. Think about it. The time before Christ. That's even David. That was what David had to do. He had to make acts of perfect contrition. Sacrifices did not take away the sins of themselves. Even the Apostle Paul says that. And even Jewish rabbis would say that. Why did God make them wander in the desert? Because they needed to learn that before they could have the sacrifice, they need to have the relationship right with Him first. To borrow Protestant terminology. Sorry about that. Oven went off. That's your alarm for you need the sacraments. You need the sacraments. But yeah, it is possible. It is possible to do this, and you're in good company. So to anyone who is totally isolated from the traditional Mass, you still got online masses, dry mass, private devotions. You can concoct something of your own to make an act of spiritual communion, and it's demoralizing. And I'll say this, and I need to say this to myself because I need to hear this too sometimes. Don't think of yourself as being in a situation where it's almost like you're cut off from God, like people in the Middle Ages who were excommunicated from the church for grave sins have more access to the church and the sacraments than you do. Don't think of it like that. Think of it as in you're in the company of Moses in the desert. You're in the company of David, who didn't have access to the sacraments of the new law. He had sacraments of the old law, but not the new. You're in the company of Aaron, who was still waiting for even the sacrifices of the old law, waiting for Moses to come down on Mount Sinai. How are you to respond? Put yourself in those shoes. See yourself in that light. And see yourself in the tradition of the Maronites. The Maronites. Now, the Maronites did have access to sacraments in this regard. Their story is quite famous. They were isolated in the hill country of Lebanon, an order of Christian warriors, cut off from the rest of the Christian world. What did they do? Saw these pagans here, surrounded by Muslims, so what they do? They decided they would evangelize. And that was how Lebanon converted to the Catholic faith. That's how they received the gospel, because they did not fall into self-pity. They realized, hey, I'm in the middle of nowhere. This is not a curse upon me. This is a blessing on others. I'm going to evangelize. and they did something. Now, I don't know whoever's watching this what your situation is exactly, but God will give you enough graces that you need to save your soul. But you need to start working up your salvation with fear and trembling. You need to giving up those sins. You need to be praying. And my goodness, if you are a traditional Catholic and you have other trad Catholics in the same situation as you, and one of you is saying, join up with them and pray with them, my gosh, join up and pray in person together. If you have that blessing, not everyone, because some people are truly isolated and don't even have someone to pray with. If you got someone to pray with, that's a seed that you can sow. That's something you can build off of and invite people to. And maybe someday you can have an SSPX traditional mass where you are, maybe even a priory. Starts with you. God bless. Have a great day. Let's say three Aves for everyone in Latin for everyone who is in this situation. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedictum vivus et benedictus Spiritus Sanctus tui, Jesus, Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et nostra, amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedictum vivus et benedictus Spiritus Sanctus tui, Jesus, Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et nostra, amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedictum vivus et benedictus Spiritus Sanctus tui, Jesus, Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et nostra, amen. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti, amen.